In the quiet stretch of space, far from the crowded lanes of the inner colonies, the world of Eden's Rest turned slowly under two gentle suns. It was a small place, barely a dot on galactic charts, but to those who lived there, it was everything. Green fields stretched between low hills, fed by clean rivers and tended by hands that knew every inch of soil. Children ran barefoot through orchards, laughing as they chased floating drones that delivered school lessons. The air smelled of rain and ripe fruit, and at night, families gathered under open skies to watch the stars, unaware that some of those lights were not stars at all. Luke Carter stood at the edge of his family's farm, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He was 23, lean from years of work, with eyes that had seen both joy and loss. Beside him, his 12-year-old sister Mia balanced on a fence post, sketching the twin suns in a worn notebook. She wanted to be an artist, maybe even design ships one day, though their colony had never seen anything bigger than a supply freighter. "You think they'll ever send a real starship here?" she asked, not looking up from her drawing. "Maybe," said Luke with a smile, "but if they do, I hope it's bringing ice cream, not inspectors." Mia giggled. That was their joke. Eden's Rest was so far out, so unimportant, that even bureaucrats forgot it existed. And that was fine by them. They had each other, good neighbors, and peace. What more did anyone need? But peace, as it turned out, was a luxury the galaxy no longer allowed. It began with a flicker in the sky, just a tiny distortion like heat rising off pavement, then another, and another. Within minutes, the horizon darkened with shapes, massive, silent, and utterly alien. They descended without sound, blotting out the suns like a storm made of shadow. Alarms blared across the colony. Emergency broadcasts crackled over every speaker. All citizens seek shelter. Repeat, seek shelter immediately. Panic spread faster than fire. People ran toward bunkers, clutching children, pets, whatever they could carry. Luke grabbed Mia's hand and pulled her toward the reinforced cellar beneath their home. "Hurry," he shouted over the rising wind. The sky wasn't just dark anymore. It pulsed with unnatural light, shifting colors that hurt the eyes. They barely made it inside before the first strike hit. The ground shook like the planet itself was screaming. Dust rained from the ceiling. Mia buried her face in Luke's shirt, trembling. Outside, the world unraveled. Buildings vaporized in silent flashes of white-hot plasma. Trees turned to ash mid-sway. The river boiled away in seconds. And still the ships came. Dozens of them, sleek and black, marked with jagged silver symbols that meant nothing to human eyes, but would soon mean everything. From a crack in the cellar door, Luke watched as a squad of armored figures marched through what was left of the town square. They moved with mechanical precision, scanning for life signs. When they found a group of survivors huddled in the school basement, they didn't speak, they didn't negotiate, they raised weapons that hummed like angry hornets and fired. Light filled the street, then silence. Muffled sobs came from Mia. Luke held her tighter, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wanted to scream, to run out and fight, but he knew that would only get them killed. So he stayed still, breathing shallowly, listening to the methodical destruction of everything he'd ever loved. Hours passed. The sounds of explosions faded, replaced by the low thrum of engines and the occasional burst of energy fire. Then voices, cold, guttural, speaking in a language that scraped against the ears. Luke risked another look. 3 alien soldiers stood near the remains of their porch. One held a device that glowed faintly blue. It pointed directly at their hiding spot. "No," whispered Luke. The soldier tilted its head, then raised a weapon. But before it could fire, a secondary explosion rocked the field beyond, the colony's main power core overloaded and detonating. The blast threw everyone off their feet. In the chaos, Luke dragged Mia through a broken side panel and into the irrigation tunnels beneath the farm. They ran, lungs burning, until the sounds of pursuit faded. They didn't stop until they reached the old weather station on the northern ridge. It was half buried, solar panels cracked, but the emergency beacon still worked. He activated it, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, was listening. Then he wrapped a blanket around Mia, who hadn't spoken since the cellar. "Are they gone?" she asked, voice small. "I don't know," said Luke. "But we're still here." He looked out over the valley, where once there had been homes, gardens, laughter, now only smoke and ruin. Bodies lay scattered like discarded toys. The twin suns set behind the wreckage, casting long shadows that felt like graves. That night, as Mia slept fitfully on a cot, Luke sat by the broken window, staring at the stars.
His hands shook, not from fear, but from something deeper, something sharp and cold forming in his chest. He thought of his parents lost in the first wave, of his friends erased in seconds, of the way the aliens had looked at Mia, not as a child, but as data to be collected. He picked up a scorched comms unit from the floor, its screen cracked but still functional. With numb fingers, he recorded a message. His voice was quiet, steady, but carried a weight that hadn't been there before. If anyone hears this, my name is Luke Carter. I'm from Eden's Rest. They came without warning, without reason. They killed everyone. They killed our children. And if you're out there, if there's still someone who can hear us, tell them this. We're not just farmers and teachers and kids drawing pictures of stars. We're more than that. And if they think this is the end of humanity, they're wrong. Because now we remember who we really are. He stopped the recording, saved it to the emergency broadcast channel, and leaned back against the wall. Outside, the wind howled through empty streets. But somewhere, deep in the void, a signal pulsed outward, carrying grief, yes, but also a promise. You killed our children. Now you'll meet the other side of humanity.
Weeks passed like slow breaths in the dark. Luke Carter drifted alone inside the rusted shell of an old cargo hauler called the Iron Mule, a forgotten supply ship that had been abandoned near Eden's Rest in the colony's early days. He'd found it half buried in a dry riverbed, its engines dead but its life support barely functional. With scavenged parts and desperate hope, he'd coaxed enough power to keep the air breathable and the lights dimly glowing. Food was running low, just protein bars and stale water, but hunger was the least of his worries. Grief sat heavier than any weight. He spent most days staring out the cracked viewport at the endless stars, replaying the last moments on Eden's Rest in his mind. Mia's laugh, the smell of rain on warm soil, the way the sky turned gold just before sunset. Now there was only silence in the hum of failing systems. He kept the comms unit on, scanning every frequency, hoping for a reply to his message. Nothing came back but static and the occasional automated distress call from other dead worlds. One night, as he dozed in the pilot's chair, a faint ping echoed through the speakers. Not static. Not a loop, a real signal, tight, encrypted, and repeating. Luke jolted awake, fingers flying over the console. He rerouted power to the receiver, boosted the gain, and held his breath. After minutes of tuning, a voice broke through, calm, female, and sharp as steel. This is Captain Dana Ellis of the USS Vanguard. Identify yourself and state your emergency. Luke's throat tightened. He hadn't heard another human voice in 28 days. My name is Luke Carter. I'm the only survivor from Eden's Rest. They killed everyone. A pause, then, stand by. For 3 hours, nothing happened. Luke wondered if he'd imagined it. Then, without warning, a ship dropped out of warp right beside the Iron Mule. It wasn't like any vessel he'd ever seen. Sleek, black-gray with angular lines and no visible insignia, it moved like a predator, silent, smooth, and utterly in control. Docking clamps latched onto his hull with soft thuds, airlocks equalized, boots echoed in the corridor. The hatch opened. A woman stepped through, tall and lean, wearing a dark uniform with no rank pins. Her eyes scanned the cabin fast, missing nothing. Behind her stood 2 others, both armed, both silent. She looked at Luke, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. You're alive, she said, not as a question, but as a fact she'd already accepted. Barely, Luke replied. She introduced herself as Captain Dana Ellis. The others were Chief Engineer Riley Jones and Tactical Officer Nate Cruz. They didn't ask many questions at first. Instead, they gave him water, a clean blanket, and a hot meal. Real food, not paste. Only when he'd eaten did Ellis sit across from him and say, "Tell me everything." So he did. He told her about the twin sons, the school, Mia's drawings. He described the ships, the weapons, the cold efficiency of the slaughter. He played the recording he'd made that night on the ridge. When it ended, the cabin was quiet except for the low thrum of the Vanguard's engines. Ellis stood and walked to the brief port. They call themselves the Galactic Dominion, self-appointed peacekeepers. They've been cleansing species they deem unstable for centuries. We've watched them from the shadows, never engaged, until now. You knew? Luke asked, stunned. Not about Eden's Rest, she said, turning to face him, but we knew they were coming for us. Humanity's expansion has been inconvenient for their order. They prefer obedient colonies, not free thinkers, not children who draw starships and dream of flying them. She explained that the Vanguard wasn't part of the United Earth Fleet or any public military branch. It belonged to the Deep Range Defense Corps, a secret division formed decades ago after first contact protocols failed. While the world celebrated diplomacy, the DRDC prepared for war.
They trained in hidden bases, tested forbidden tech, and studied every hostile species in known space. Their mission was simple. If Earth ever faced extinction, they would be the last line of defense. "Most people think we're a myth," said Nate with a grim smile. "Good. Myths don't get targeted." Riley added, "We've been tracking Dominion movements for months. Your signal was the first real proof they'd crossed into our sector." Luke looked around the ship. Everything was clean, efficient, built for speed and stealth. No luxury, no waste. This wasn't a vessel of exploration. It was a weapon wrapped in silence. "What happens now?" he asked. Ellis met his eyes. "Now we answer." She led him to the bridge, a compact, dimly lit room filled with holographic displays and quiet urgency. Crew members moved with purpose, speaking in low tones. On the main screen, a star map showed Dominion patrol routes, supply chains, and command hubs. One location pulsed red, the capital moon of Corvex, the Dominion admiral responsible for the Eden Purge. "They think we're scattered. They think we're weak. They don't know we've been waiting." "Waiting for what?" asked Luke. "For someone to hurt us enough that we stop hiding." Luke felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just rescue. It was the beginning of something else, something older than treaties, deeper than fear. Over the next few days, the Vanguard moved like a ghost through dead zones and asteroid belts, avoiding sensors and patrols. Luke helped where he could, sorting data, learning basic systems. He watched how the crew operated, not with anger, but with cold focus. They weren't soldiers seeking revenge. They were guardians waking from a long sleep. One evening, as the Vanguard coasted near a derelict mining station, Ellis found Luke staring at a photo of Mia on his old tablet. "You don't have to come with us," she said quietly. "We can drop you at a safe zone, neutral territory." Luke shook his head. "They killed my sister, my home, everyone I knew. If there's a chance to make sure no one else loses what I lost, I have to go." Ellis nodded. No more words were needed. The Vanguard changed course, not towards safety, not towards escape, but deeper into Dominion space, towards the heart of the storm. As they entered a dense nebula masking their signature, Ellis activated the ship-wide comm. Her voice carried through every corridor, calm but unshakable. "They came to our world. They burned our fields. They erased our children. They believe humanity is soft, that we beg for peace because we fear war. Today, we show them the truth. We are not just builders and dreamers. We are also the fire that cleanses, the shield that holds, the hand that strikes when all else fails. This is not vengeance. This is warning." On the bridge, Luke stood beside her, watching the stars blur into streaks as the Vanguard jumped to warp. Somewhere ahead, Admiral Corvex sat in his command throne, unaware that the galaxy had just changed, because humanity wasn't hiding anymore, and the other side had arrived.
The Galactic Dominion Council chamber glowed with cold silver light, its high walls lined with banners bearing the sigil of unity, a circle pierced by a single blade. At the center of the room, seated on a raised dais, Admiral Corvex listened as reports poured in from across the outer rim. His face, narrow and scaled, betrayed no emotion, but his tail flicked in quiet satisfaction. The human colony designated Eden's Rest had been cleansed, another unstable species brought to order, another threat erased before it could spread. "Final count confirms 0 survivors," said a junior officer, bowing low. "Genetic samples secured, cultural artifacts cataloged, planetary sterilization complete." Corvex nodded. "Good. Log it as Operation Silent Harvest. Let it serve as an example to other fringe species who mistake freedom for chaos." Around him, council members murmured approval. Humans had always been a problem, too emotional, too unpredictable, too quick to fight over ideas instead of submitting to structure. Now they were just another footnote in the Dominion's long history of peace through control. But then, strange reports began to surface. First, Outpost K7 vanished. No distress call, no debris, just silence. Then supply convoy Delta 9 failed to arrive at its destination. Scans showed only empty space where 3 freighters should have been. Then came word from the mining moon of Veltar. Entire security garrisons found unconscious, systems wiped clean, ships missing from docks. "Could it be rebels?" asked the counselor, uneasy. Corvex scoffed. "Rebels lacked the skill, and the humans lacked the means. This is coincidence, system failures, nothing more."
Yet the disappearances continued. Patrol fleets returned with damaged hulls and confused crews, claiming they'd been ambushed by ghost ships that moved faster than physics allowed. One pilot swore he saw human markings, but that was impossible. All known human vessels had been tracked, logged, and deemed harmless. Then came the strike on Helios Relay. It was a minor station, but vital, a communications hub linking Dominion command centers across 3 sectors. One moment it hummed with data traffic, the next every screen went dark. When recovery teams arrived, they found the station intact but empty. No bodies, no blood, just a single message burned into the main console in plain galactic script. You killed our children. Panic rippled through the ranks. Corvex ordered full surveillance sweeps, doubled patrols, and deployed hunter-killer drones. Still, the attacks grew bolder. A weapons depot on Zyra 4 exploded from within. A training facility on Orcs Prime lost power for 12 hours, during which time every trainee vanished without a trace. Each incident left behind the same phrase, sometimes etched in metal, sometimes broadcast on open channels, always calm, always certain. Finally, Corvex could ignore it no longer. He summoned his top intelligence officer, a sharp-eyed strategist named Vrel. "Find them," Corvex commanded. "Hunt them. Burn their hiding place to ash." Vrel hesitated. What if it's not a hiding place? What if it's a fleet? Corvex laughed, a dry, clicking sound. Humans have no fleet beyond their pathetic border guards. They build toys, not warships. But Vrel wasn't so sure. Meanwhile, deep in the shadow of a dead star, the USS Vanguard drifted silently. Aboard, Luke Carter studied holographic maps alongside Nate Cruz, who pointed to a cluster of Dominion outposts. "They're scared," Nate said. "You can see it in their patrol patterns. Tighter groups, slower routes. They're waiting for us to show our hand." "We already have," Luke replied softly. "Every time we hit one of their bases, we remind them we're not gone. We're watching." Captain Ellis entered the room, her expression unreadable. "They're broadcasting propaganda now," she said, "calling us terrorists, saying we're rogue elements, not true humans." Riley Jones snorted from the engineering console. "Let them lie. Truth doesn't need a megaphone." Ellis walked to the main viewer where footage played of Corvex addressing the Dominion public. He stood tall, declaring humanity extinct, calling the recent attacks the death throes of a dying species, but his eyes darted slightly, just once when he said it. "He knows," Ellis said. "He just won't admit it yet." That night, the Vanguard made its boldest move yet. Using stolen Dominion codes and a cloaked approach, they slipped past defenses and struck the capital moon itself. Not the military zones, but the central archive tower where records of every purge were stored. They didn't destroy it, they downloaded everything. Then, as Dominion fighters scrabbled to respond, the Vanguard vanished again, leaving behind only a new message projected across the moon's sky in 10 languages. "You killed our children. Now you'll meet the other side of humanity." This time, the message didn't fade. It looped for hours, visible from every city, every home. Citizens whispered in fear. Soldiers questioned orders. Even loyal officers wondered, what if the humans weren't gone? What if they'd been something else all along? Corvex flew into a rage. He ordered every available ship to hunt the Vanguard, promising execution for anyone who failed. But the more he raged, the more cracks appeared in his control. Dissent spread, rumors grew, and for the first time in centuries, the Dominion felt something it led long forgotten: doubt. Aboard the Vanguard, Luke Carter watched the news feeds captured from enemy broadcasts. He saw fear in alien faces, confusion, uncertainty. It wasn't joy he felt, it was purpose. "They thought we were just settlers," he said quietly. "They thought we were prey," Ellis replied, standing beside him. "Now they know we're predators too." The ship turned toward the next target, not out of hate, but necessity, because as long as the Dominion believed humans were weak, more colonies would burn, more children would die. And Earth, still unaware of the war brewing in the dark, remained vulnerable. So the Vanguard moved on, a shadow among stars, carrying the memory of Eden's rest in every action. And far away, in the heart of Dominion space, Admiral Corvex stared at the looping message in his sky and finally understood. Humanity hadn't been erased. It had been awakened. long before the Dominion ever heard of Earth, long before Eden's Rest was even a dream in a planner's notebook, humanity had already begun preparing for the worst. While diplomats shook hands with alien envoys and news channels celebrated first contact as a new era of peace, a small group of military leaders met in secret beneath the rocky crust of Mars. They knew history too well. Every great civilization that opened its doors without guarding its walls eventually fell. So they built a shield no one could see. They called it the Deep Range Defense Corps, or DRDC. No flags, no public bases, no official records, just ships, soldiers, and a single rule: protect humanity at all costs, even if it meant never being thanked. Recruits were chosen not for strength alone, but for silence, loyalty, and the ability to carry unbearable weight without breaking. They trained in abandoned asteroid belts, simulated extinction-level wars, and studied every hostile species known to exist. Their motto wasn't written down, it was lived. Hope for peace, prepare for war. Captain Dana Ellis was born into this world. Her parents had served in early DRDC operations, and she'd grown up on hidden stations where bedtime stories were about tactical retreats and encryption codes. By 16, she could pilot a stealth corvette. By 25, she commanded her own ship. Now, aboard the USS Vanguard, she wasn't just fighting a war, she was fulfilling a promise made decades before she was born. Luke Carter watched her one evening as she reviewed battle logs in the dim light of the command deck. He'd begun to understand that the Vanguard wasn't just a ship, it was the tip of a spear forged in secrecy. Riley Jones, the chief engineer, had once told him how they'd spent years reverse engineering alien tech, blending it with human ingenuity to create drives that bent space without leaving a trace. Nate Cruz, the tactical officer, could predict enemy movements by studying patterns in supply requests and shift rotations. Every crew member carried scars, not all of them visible, but none of them spoke of home, because for them, the Vanguard was home. "You ever wonder what they'd say back on Earth?" Luke asked one night, sitting beside Ellis in the observation blister. "Who?" she replied, eyes still on the star field. "Regular people, farmers, teachers, kids like Mia, if they knew we were out here doing this." Ellis was quiet for a long moment. "They'd sleep easier," she said finally, "and that's enough." The truth was, the DRDC had never wanted glory, they wanted safety. They knew that if the galaxy saw humanity as gentle, curious, and kind, which it was, that image had to be protected. But kindness without teeth is just weakness, and weakness invites slaughter. So when the Dominion struck Eden's Rest, they didn't just kill colonists, they woke something ancient in the human spirit, the same fire that had driven people to cross oceans, climb mountains, and reach for the stars even when told it was impossible. Only this time, that fire was guided by discipline, technology, and a network of warriors who'd been waiting in the dark. The Vanguard's attacks weren't random. Each strike was calculated to cripple Dominion logistics while avoiding civilian casualties. They sabotaged fuel depots, not nurseries. They hijacked data cores, not hospitals. They left messages not to boast, but to warn: "We see you, we remember, and we will not let you do this again." Back on Dominion worlds, unrest grew. Citizens began asking questions. Why had they attacked a peaceful colony? Why were humans suddenly so capable? Whispers spread of a hidden human fleet, trained from birth for war. Some called it myth, others feared it was true. Admiral Corvex doubled down. He declared the Vanguard a terrorist cell, not a military unit. He ordered mass arrests of anyone questioning Dominion policy. But fear breeds resistance, and resistance spreads faster than control. Meanwhile, the Vanguard received new orders, not from a government, but from a buried protocol known only as Watchtower. It activated when 3 conditions were met: loss of a human colony, confirmed use of orbital sterilization, and evidence of systemic targeting of children. All 3 had been fulfilled on Eden's Rest. The protocol unlocked access to hidden shipyards near Neptune's orbit, facilities so secret even most Earth officials didn't know they existed. There, dozens of advanced vessels waited, powered down but ready. Among them was the USS Sentinel, the USS Reaper, and the USS Phoenix, ships designed not for exploration but for survival. Ellis transmitted a coded message to these silent fleets. One by one, they powered up. Engines hummed to life after decades of stillness. Crews who'd lived in isolation for years stood at their posts, helmets sealed, hearts steady. Luke helped analyze Dominion shield frequencies, using data stolen from the archive tower. He discovered a flaw, a microsecond delay in regeneration when hit from 2 angles at once. It was tiny, almost invisible, but to the Vanguard, it was a crack in the wall. They built their empire on the idea that no one would fight back. Now they're facing an enemy that doesn't just fight, they learn, Nate said during a strategy session. Riley added, and we've been learning for a very long time. As the Vanguard prepared for its next move, Luke thought of Mia, not just with tears anymore, but with clarity. She hadn't just been a girl drawing starships, she'd been part of what made humanity worth protecting: curiosity, hope, imagination. And now that same spirit fueled the ships racing towards Dominion space, not for revenge, but for tomorrow. Because the other side of humanity wasn't just about war, it was about making sure there were still children left to dream.
Admiral Corvex stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Iron Decree, staring at the tactical display with eyes narrowed in fury. Reports flooded in from every sector. Human ships were no longer ghosts, they were everywhere. Sleek black vessels emerged from dead zones, striking supply lines, disabling relay stations, and vanishing before reinforcements arrived. Worse, they moved with terrifying coordination, as if guided by a single mind. Panic spread through Dominion ranks. Even veteran commanders hesitated before engaging. Corvex refused to believe it. Humans were primitives, chaotic, disorganized. They couldn't possibly have built a fleet like this in secret. Yet the evidence was undeniable. So he made his final gamble. He would end this war before it truly began. He gathered every ship he could, over 200 warships, carriers, and destroyers, and set course for the one place he believed would break humanity's spirit once and for all: Earth. "Let them hide in shadows," he growled to his officers. "We will burn their cradle. When their homeworld falls, their resistance will die with it." The Armada jumped to warp, a storm of metal and fire aimed at the blue-green planet that had birthed the species now haunting his empire. But Earth wasn't waiting alone. Deep in the Kuiper Belt, beyond the orbit of Pluto, hidden among ice and silence, the DDRC's true strength stirred. Dozens of warships powered up, ships never seen by human eyes, let alone alien ones. The USS Sentinel, the USS Reaper, the USS Phoenix, and more, all forged in secrecy over decades. Their crews, trained since childhood for this moment, sealed their helmets and took their stations. Captain Ellis, aboard the Vanguard, linked her ship to the network. Luke Carter sat beside her, now a full tactical analyst, his hands steady on the console. "We think we're just defending," Ellis said over the comms. "Today, we show them what defense really looks like." The battle didn't begin near Earth. It began in the void between stars, where space itself seemed to hold its breath. The Dominion Armada exited warp expecting empty darkness. Instead, they found a wall of human ships, silent, waiting, perfectly positioned. No warning was given, no message broadcast. The Vanguard fired first. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a lesson. Human pilots flew maneuvers that defied physics, using gravity slingshots and micro-warp bursts to appear where they shouldn't be. Drones, small and fast, swarmed like insects, overwhelming enemy targeting systems. And then came the shield trick Luke had discovered: paired strikes from opposite angles, timed to the millisecond, collapsing Dominion defenses like paper walls. Corvex screamed orders, but chaos had already taken root. His fleet, built for domination, not adaptation, crumbled under tactics it couldn't predict. Ships exploded not in grand fireballs, but in silent implosions as internal systems failed one by one. The Vanguard cut through the center like a blade, heading straight for the Iron Decree. Aboard the Dominion flagship, alarms blared. Corvex watched helplessly as his escort ships vanished from the display. "Impossible!" he roared. "They don't have this technology." "They've had it for years," a shaken officer whispered. "They just never showed it." On the Vanguard's bridge, Luke locked on to the Iron Decree's core. "Shield matrix is cycling," he said. "Window opens in 3, 2, 1. "Fire," Ellis commanded. A single volley, precise, brutal, pierced the flagship's heart. The explosion lit up the void like a second sun. Silence returned. The remaining Dominion ships, leaderless and broken, powered down their weapons. Surrender signals blinked across every channel. Ellis didn't gloat, she didn't celebrate. She simply opened a galaxy-wide broadcast, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of every lost child, every burned home, every silenced voice. "This is Captain Dana Ellis of the United Earth Deep Range Defense Corps.
You came to our worlds. You killed our children. You thought we were weak because we chose peace. But peace is not weakness, it is choice. And today, we chose to remind you what happens when you take that choice away." She paused, then added, "Hurt our children again, and you won't get a second warning." The message ended. The human fleet regrouped, not in triumph, in solemn unity. They escorted the defeated Dominion ships to neutral space, then turned toward home, not the fragile colonies, but the hidden bases where they'd trained in silence for so long. Weeks later, peace talks began. The Dominion, humbled and fractured, agreed to withdraw from all human sectors. Reparations were discussed, memorials were promised, but none of that mattered to Luke. He stood on the observation deck of the Vanguard, now docked in a quiet orbital yard near Mars. In his hand, he held Mia's old sketchbook, recovered from the ruins of Eden's Rest. The pages were singed at the edges, but her drawings remained. Stars, ships, smiling faces. He traced the lines with his finger, not with sorrow, but with quiet pride. Captain Ellis joined him. "You did good, Luke. We all did. For her, for everyone." Below them, Earth turned peacefully, unaware of how close it had come to ruin or how fiercely it had been protected. In the months that followed, the DDRC remained hidden. Governments issued vague statements about diplomatic resolutions and mutual understanding. Most people would never know the truth, and that was fine, because the point was never fame. It was safety. It was making sure that somewhere, on some quiet colony under twin suns, a child could still draw starships without fear. Luke stayed with the Vanguard. He wasn't a soldier by training, but he'd become one by necessity and by choice. He knew now that humanity had two faces, one gentle, one fierce. Both were real, both were necessary. And as the ship prepared for its next patrol, drifting once more into the endless dark, Luke looked out at the stars, not as a victim, but as a guardian, because the galaxy had learned the hard way. You can try to break humanity, but you'll never see the other side coming.